Hello everyone, in today's video we will go to the heart of the greatest disaster of ancient Rome, the Great Fire of Nero. In 64 AD we will study the eyewitness accounts of Tacitus and Suetonius, find out what archaeology really tells us about the ashes of the city, and decide once and for all, was Nero an arsonist emperor or just a convenient scapegoat in history? If you like exciting historical mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our epic deep dives. Imagine Rome in the summer of 64 CE, scorching heat, narrow streets crowded with merchants and beggars and grand temples casting shifting shadows under a relentless sun. At the center of it all sat the young Emperor Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, only in his mid-20s but wielding absolute power over the sprawling city. Born in 37 CE into the Julio-Claudian dynasty, Nero had ascended the purple in 54 CE at age 16 after the suspicious death of his adoptive father, Emperor Claudius. Early in his reign, guided by the philosopher-statesman Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, Nero showed promise. He sponsored athletic games, reduced taxes, and enacted public welfare measures. Yet the balance between philosopher and potentate was fragile. On the night of July 18, 64 CE, some accounts say it began around midnight. Spark ignited in shops north of the Circus Maximus. Whether the cause was a cooking grate left too close to wooden beams, a discarded ember from a brazier, or spontaneous combustion among peddler stalls, no one can say for sure. What followed was a conflagration of unprecedented scale. Flames leapt from one frame and wattle dwelling to the next. Cracks in stuccoed walls allowed embers to drift and ignite thatch rooftops like tinder. By dawn, the fire had engulfed Regio X and Regio X, racing east along the Palatine slopes. Nero awoke to smoke filling the imperial palace windows. According to Tacitus, he dispatched Sextus Victorius, an experienced equestrian officer, with orders to use fire breaks pulling down buildings in the fire's path to halt its spread. Yet the blow was uneven. Demolition teams stopped too briefly or abandoned efforts as winds shifted. By the time the flames reached the Capitoline Hylla site sacred to Jupiter, the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus itself suffered damage, its gold-leafed roof and marble statues charred. For 6 days Rome burned. In those frantic hours, aristocrats fled with their families and portable silverware. Slaves hoisted their masters' children. Stray animals stampeded into the Tiber River. On July 23rd, calmer winds allowed firefighting brigades organized under the aediles and backed by Nero's own Praetorian Guard to contain the blaze. However, a sudden wind change on July 24th reignited embers, and the firestorm swirled northward through Regio IV and Regio V. By the time the ash settled around the 82 Rome's 14 districts, 3 were utterly destroyed and over 10 were severely damaged. Estimates vary, but as many as 10,000 people perished and perhaps 250,000 were left homeless. The city's housing crisis escalated, open land was scarce, and repairs could take years. In the immediate aftermath, Nero opened the Field of Mars and agrarian estates north of the city to shelter refugees. He redirected the state treasury to fund relief and food distributions. He even provided direct imperial subsidies to prevent famine. Workmen were employed to clear rubble and rebuild key infrastructure roads, aqueducts, and grain storage tribunals. The emperor undertook an ambitious reconstruction plan, laying out broader streets and mandatory building codes that required fire-resistant materials, brick-faced walls, tile roofs, and standardized block sizes. Out of the ashes, a new Rome would arise. Rome Nero later boasted that rivaled the grandeur of Carthage or Alexandria. Yet all these measures could not drown out public anguish and suspicion. Rumors surfaced. He fiddled while Rome burned. Satirists and gossip mongers spread the tale that Nero, reclining at his villa in Antium, sang the Sac of Ilium while the city smoldered. Later chroniclers, especially Suetonius in the early 2nd century CE, embellished the story. They described Nero donning stage costume and lyre, lost in artistic inspiration. No contemporary source records an actual performance that night. Tacitus does not mention a lyre, and the fiddle did not exist in Nero's time, but the image proved indelible. Were these rumors mere slander, or did they reflect deeper truths about Nero's relationship with his people? In the next section, we'll examine how ancient commentators shaped his legacy, portraying him alternately as an artist pharaoh and a tyrannical monster. We'll trace the threads of fact and fiction and ask whether the man who claimed to found Rome anew deserves the ignominious title of Arsonist Emperor, or if he was simply a convenient scapegoat for an uncontrollable disaster. To understand why Nero's name became synonymous with the Great Fire, we must listen closely to those ancient voices that recorded, or perhaps distorted, his deeds. Tacitus, writing his annals in the early 2nd century CE under Emperor Trajan, is our most carefully reasoned source. He explains that public opinion blamed Nero for the fire, and that the emperor, eager to deflect blame, accused a marginalized group, Christians. Tacitus records that Nero's persecutio led to the first state-sponsored atrocity against Christians in Rome. He describes victims dressed in animal skins to be torn apart by dogs or nailed to crosses and set aflame as night lamps. Tacitus's aim was moral, condemning the inhumanity of persecuting innocents, but he also demonstrates Nero's political calculus, sacrificing a minority to save his own skin. Yet Tacitus admits Nero may have had no hand in starting the blaze. By contrast, Cassius Dio, writing in Greek nearly 200 years after the events, leans more heavily on legend. In his Roman history, Dio claims that Nero watched the fire from Maecenas' tower with a lyre in hand, singing of Troy's fall. Dio's narrative drips with moralizing. He portrays the emperor as indulgent and uncaring, a ruler enthralled by spectacle rather than duty. Dio's perspective reflects a broader tradition in which subsequent emperors and senatorial elites distanced themselves from Nero's memory, emphasizing his excesses to legitimize their own rule. Suetonius, an equestrian historian under Hadrian, compiled the 12 Caesars around 121 CE. His Nero biography brims with sensational anecdotes: the emperor's murder of his mother Agrippina, his exile of his pregnant mistress Poppaea, and yes, the savage details of the Great Fire. Suetonius claims Nero ordered the city to be set on fire, then sang triumphantly over its ruins. Later, when rebuilding plans proved too costly, he prioritized entertainment, staging lavish games and exhibitions at public expense. Suetonius's flair for drama has shaped popular images of Nero far more than Tacitus's sober analysis. Why did these authors blame Nero so eagerly? First, his policies alienated Rome's aristocratic elite. His spending on public spectacles, horse races, gladiatorial combats, and his own theatrical performances drained the treasury. His brutal suppression of dissent, including executions without trial, stoked fear among senators and equestrians. In 68 CE, rebellion spread across Gaul and Hispania. The Praetorian Guard declared Nero a public enemy. Facing certain death, Nero committed suicide on June 9, 68 CE, uttering the famous line, "Qualis artifex perio." Second, Nero's dramatic persona made him an easy villain. He challenged traditional Roman values by appearing on stage, a role reserved for slaves and foreigners. He embraced Greek culture and introduced Eastern musical forms, leading conservatives to label him a decadent Oriental prince. The fire, an event beyond human control, became a symbol of moral decay. Casting Nero as arsonist was convenient. It explained catastrophe through malice rather than chance, assigning blame to a recognizable figure. Over the centuries, church fathers, medieval chroniclers, and Renaissance humanists all reiterated aspects of the Nero arson myth to underscore lessons about tyranny. For early Christians, Nero's persecution of believers became emblematic of pagan cruelty. In medieval Europe, Nero featured as a cautionary case of unbridled power. And in Renaissance art, depictions of the burning city and the emperor's aloofness served as moral spectacles. Yet beneath these layers of accusation lay a more complex reality. A city built of wood and cramped alleys was always vulnerable to fire. Fires broke out in Rome roughly every generation. An elite household might burn entirely in an afternoon. Reconstruction under Nero did introduce fire-proofing measures that arguably advanced urban planning. And the emperor's relief efforts, opening his gardens, subsidizing rations, saved lives and prevented mass starvation. In the final section, we'll weigh these ancient judgments against archaeological findings and modern scholarship. We'll ask, was Nero truly the arsonist he is remembered to be, or merely the scapegoat for a disaster that had no single human cause? And what does his story teach us about the way disasters, both natural and man-made, are politicized even today? As the last embers of the Great Fire of Rome dimmed in 64 CE, a single question spread faster than the flames themselves. Who was to blame? Among the ruins, suspicion quickly turned toward the Emperor Nero. Ancient historians didn't hesitate to feed the narrative. Suetonius wrote that Nero watched the inferno from his palace, singing of Troy's fall while Rome burned. Tacitus added a layer of doubt, noting the rumors but also recording Nero's relief efforts, opening his gardens to refugees and organizing emergency food supplies. Still, the image of a fiddling emperor became legendary, though, in truth, fiddles didn't exist in Nero's time. What we do know is this: the fire destroyed vast portions of Rome, damaging 10 of its 14 districts. The archaeological record supports the destruction, showing intense burning in the city center. But no evidence, ancient or modern, proves that Nero orchestrated the blaze. However, Nero's post-fire behavior raised eyebrows. He initiated massive reconstruction, including his controversial new palace, the Domus Aurea, an opulent structure with gold-covered walls, grand halls, and artificial lakes. To the Roman elite and displaced citizens, this palace symbolized not renewal, but vanity rising from ruin. It's no wonder many suspected foul play. Yet Nero also introduced practical reforms. He updated building codes to prevent future fires, widening streets, limiting wooden construction, and introducing fire breaks between homes. These were genuine improvements for urban safety. But his critics weren't interested in reforms, they wanted a villain. Faced with public outrage, Nero made a fateful decision: he blamed the Christians. At the time, this small, mysterious sect was widely misunderstood and viewed with suspicion. Nero accused them of starting the fire and subjected them to horrific punishments: burning, crucifixion, and death by wild beasts. Tacitus, though no fan of Christians, condemned Nero's cruelty. Ironically, in trying to deflect blame, Nero deepened his infamy. His brutal scapegoating created the image of a tyrant and emperor willing to kill the innocent to save himself. The fire became the defining moment of his rule, and the idea that Nero started it persisted long after his death. Modern historians now view this differently. Many argue that Nero was no arsonist, but a ruler overwhelmed by disaster. His eccentricities, artistic passions, Greek-style performances alienated Rome's traditional elite. His ambition, especially the building of the Golden House, only made matters worse. In the end, Nero may not have lit the fire, but he couldn't escape its political heat. The legend of Nero as Rome's arsonist emperor remains one of history's most enduring myths, born from fear, shaped by propaganda, and fed by the flames of rumor.